Well, good morning. Delighted to see so many of our colleagues here, and welcome to the State Library. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Leah Giles Peters, the State Librarian here. I'd like to welcome all of you, and especially to acknowledge the traditional owners and the land on which we're meeting today, and of course on which this beautiful building stands. I'm really delighted to welcome Paul. In fact, I had the pleasure of being in a workshop earlier this year with Paul, and he certainly provoked much discussion and thought, so I'm hoping he'll do the same today. Paul is here today as part of his tour of Australian state libraries, where he's been running workshops and forums around issues surrounding Web 2 information and libraries. And our decision to be part of that tour, of course, is affirmed by the number of people that are here today and the diversity of people that are here, which delights me greatly. There's many people from libraries and, of course, from across government and some from the private sector. Paul describes himself as an Auckland-based commentator and thinker on the topics of information access and cultural techno-change. Paul's blog reveals his interest and expertise in the areas of open access repositories, Creative Commons, and that he's a fan of the original BBC radio soap, The Archers. Log on to that. He was recently appointed as Adjunct Director, Digital Library, the National Library of New Zealand, and he puts a strong emphasis on how communities access and contribute to knowledge. He's the co-founder and joint managing director of McGovern Online, a full-service online media company who, since 1995, have provided strategy, design and development in the field of new media and internet to clients in New Zealand, Fiji and the UK. In August 2005, he was appointed to the New Zealand Government Digital Strategy Advisory Group. He also serves on the capability panel for RIANZ and the New Zealand Advanced Network, Karen. He's also in his second term on the New Zealand Library and Information Advisory Commission. And in fact, part of our interest today, of course, at State Library, is in our development of a digital content strategy. So a lot of what Paul will be talking about today has high particular relevance to the work that we're doing in the State Library and the development of a digital content strategy. And I know that Paul's presentation will be a catalyst for much discussion. So we've allocated time at the end of his talk, and I think you're going to talk for about an hour, Paul, and delighted to take questions at the end of that. So, and those questions and the presentation are being recorded, so when you've got questions of Paul, if you can just give your name, and at the end of the presentation, if you don't want to be included in that recorded material that will be available on our website, just let us know. So thank you, Paul, and welcome, and we really look forward to your presentation.
Hi, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It truly is a great pleasure to be here. I've been in Auckland, New Zealand for 17 years. I arrived in New Zealand in 1990, having been captured by a Kiwi woman and sandbagged, and I just arrived. So I've been here in Auckland 17 years, but I've never been to Brisbane. So it's been really interesting to come here and remedy that. So I also rediscovered the golden rule of when you're on a bit of a roadshow. It's okay to arrive late and sit in your apartment in the evening because that's all right. You're a bit tired, you can do that. But what isn't okay is to hang about in the morning. You need to get out as early as possible and just have a look at the sunshine. So it was a great pleasure for me to get out this morning and just have a wander along and see a river and discover another South Bank, which is great because, just as we settle down on the intro, the notion of a South Bank is a really warm thing for me. It's a big memory, it's a big imprint in me, because despite the accent, there's a huge part of me is still a good old London boy, a little Brixton boy, and some of you, I suspect, in this room There must be at least one of you who was in the housing co-op squat situation in the 80s in London. I'm sure that's absolutely true. So I was a Clapham Brixton boy all through the 80s and came here in 1990. So the idea of finding another South Bank, well, that was cool. That was cool. And then to find there was a cultural quarter, and there was a state library, and there was a museum, and there was all that kind of stuff. Well, I just love that stuff. So you need to know that. I come with my own footprint. So what I'm about to say is very much based on my experience, which is now quite 58 years of it, of which 12 years has been online. Originally discovered the online world and the internet thing feels like a long time ago, but it wasn't. It was just over, 12 years ago, whatever. And for me, it was one of the most extraordinary, interesting points in what has been quite a busy, interesting life. You know, I've got at least 3 past lives behind me. But finding the internet thing was a really, really significant point for me because I'd come to New Zealand, as I said, in 1990. I'd set up shop as a freelance editor and writer in a country which I'd just come to with my partner, Helen. And I don't know about you guys in 1990, but when I went in Auckland in 1990, it was in the middle of a recession. So, and setting up as a freelance writer is a really dumb thing to do, actually. And because you starve. Well, you starve, but you come pretty close to sort of, it gets a bit tough. Because it's all in your phone book, and you haven't got a phone book, and so you've really got to start, making connections and doing stuff into the publishing world. And I did that, and that worked. And while I did that, we were getting connections with publishers. You sign on with a sort of extra sort of movie agency because you're interested in that kind of stuff. And so you're looking at Harvey Keitel's Double in the piano. And now it's not my bap. I was the big wide double. There, a little story there. There was a whole subplot to the piano which never hit the screen, and I'm in all of it. So you won't see me on the piano, but they paid me mightily, and we got lots of food. And the punchline is, I was very popular because I had books. And the reason I had books was because I was doing a lot of reviewing, etc. Back to this internet thing. When I discovered the internet thing, I was sitting in a tumbly little room at the back of a tumbly old house in Parnell in Auckland doing the freelance editor writing thing and making enough just to survive. But totally fascinated because that's what I do and that was okay. Knew I was in a great place, knew I was in a great country, knew that there was a lot going on and that it was starting to unfold in front of me. What also unfolded in front of me was a website, the original websites. And when I first saw them, I knew I wanted to get in there. Because as far as I was concerned, it was a publishing, communication, all that kind of revolution, which we've all heard, but for me, it was just fascinating. Little tumbly old back room, tumbly old house, words appearing on the screen that I didn't type. Where did that stuff come from? So then you go on this big journey, and you go and knock on the door, and you find a couple of geeks in the back room. You realise that the best way to get the best things out of geeks, and there's a few in here, I'm sure there is, but for those of you who don't know, sugar, cake, feed them, tributes. You know the old Polynesian thing where you're up to the chief and you hand them out, before you do anything, you've got to give the chief a tribute, you've got to give them a gift. Software guys, cake. You'll go right to the top. It is absolutely guaranteed, I can assure you. I discovered more that geeks and myself had a lot in common because we had all this one capacity which was absolutely essential. It was the common ground between us. Curiosity. That curiosity about what was going on here, how do you build this, how do you this HTML thing, how do you make it, how do you stick that, it was primitive, how do you put that page of that image on the top left-hand corner, how do you align the text? You mean you can't right-hand align it? Why can't you right-hand align it? But, figuring all that out, hypertext, and realizing, wow, this stuff's astonishing. And then go and doing some presentations, and realizing that you could actually do a presentation using 56K modem, and you could take people to the New York Times website, you could take them to the Times of London, you could take them to the Jerusalem Post, and you got to come out with a great line, which is, by the way, guys, those of you who think this is slow, and you're all moaning about it, can you get a life? You've just been to New York, you've just been to London, and you've just been to Jerusalem. And you couldn't do that 2 years ago. The world of information, everything started to explode, and it was fun. Sure, it was Web 1 and all the rest of it, but it was still, we started building and making a revolution. And I want to acknowledge the people who helped me to, get my little contribution to that, and everybody else, and I'm sure there's at least half a dozen in this room, if not more, who did something way back then that helped their colleagues to figure out how to do it. And each one of you knows somebody who helped you switch on and give that, help you figure all that out. And we all did it together. And that's a keynote to all this. So let's move. I want to talk about libraries, or the library. And if you like, I want to talk about the library thing. Everybody who talks to libraries and librarians, who's not a librarian or not involved in libraries, feels an overwhelming urge to give you their library story. It's like you have to do it. You've got to pay your dues. Well, I don't mind paying that due because I totally love this story. My library story, there's many, many, many of them, but my library story is around adolescent in Edinburgh, early 60s, all things going off. But for me, one of the places where I could figure out what was going on then was the reference library in Edinburgh Public Library up on George IV Bridge. It's all across the road from the National Library, which you weren't allowed into. Hello, can I come in? No. That was the conversation you had with the National Library. Can I come in? No. Go away. Oh, okay. So you across the road, that's where you belong. So you go across the road thinking, And upstairs, you go into this brilliant, some of you may know it, this brilliant kind of slightly old-fashioned now, but the classic library, pillars and all the rest of it. And the pillars, the pillars, is, when you don't see it until you go up to the big fat pillar. The pillar's got a door, you open it, and there's a spiral staircase that takes you up to the next floor. It's really cool. Anyway, I love that place. And one of the reasons I loved it, and the reason why I like to talk about this place is because two things. First of all, for me, I'm 13 or whatever I am. This place was mine. And that's the first thing and one of the key points I want to make in this whole presentation. When I walked in there and I put down my spoor in that big room, I was putting down my spoor. I was immediately personalizing that space. I didn't go there, I didn't go there. I used that table all the time. I used that little space. I figured out where all the stuff I wanted, and I pulled it, and I dragged and dropped it onto this page, and I went onto the table, and I used it. It was my space. And I haunted it, and it's what I kind of did. And if you look at any public library or any main library, and I'm sure if I walk down there I'll start seeing evidence of this, but I'm thinking of Auckland City Library, I'm thinking of Christchurch and all the rest of it, you'll see that replicated right now. People walking into a library and you will watch them and you realise this is their library. This is not a metaphor. This is a real, actual living space for them. Cue another image. It's only about 6 months old, down in Christchurch South Library, which is one of the new public libraries. Beautiful, kind of low, long building, CAF at one end, learning centre at the other. Main body of the library in the middle. Main bit of the body of the library in the middle is a whole bunch of TVs and some beanbags and stuff. The image I want to present you to is this grandmothery figure, a big woman. And she's on the beanbag and she's spilling out over the beanbag. And she's on this PlayStation. She's like this. And her mokopuna, her grandchild's on the table, on the chair up there, reading a book. That is another image of the library. Two people personalising that space. Holding on to that, we've got to start asking the question. The other thing about it, there was two things. One is about space. The other thing is, way back then, and back to Edinburgh, it was still in the shush days. I didn't mind the shush. And even now, I don't mind the shush. Because I came from, a big family. There was no shush in our house. You wanted shush. You had to go and find shush somewhere. And the library was a great place to find shush. And what it meant was that you got to hear all the voices. Now, I wasn't tripping out here, and I didn't need medication. The voices are on the shelves. That's what libraries are about. You walk in here into the State Library of Queensland and you do it and it hits you all over again. Don't you love a library? Now, I know there's not all librarians here. I know there's a lot of issues we've got to explore, and I'll keep going and we'll explore all that. But when you walk in there, you go, Because what it shares with Christchurch, what it shares with Auckland, what it shares way back then in Edinburgh, is that not only did I have a sense of entitlement when I went in there, not only did I customize, this was a civic space. This was not a customer space. I have big, big problems with the customer word. I know it's useful, I know it helps us get better, and about services needs and all that kind of stuff. I know it's good for some government and all the rest of it to start talking about the customer word, but the customer word in terms of libraries loses the entitlement that is encapsulated in the offer, if you like. This is a civic space put together by the community group mind. And it has a history. And that history is 150 years minimum of trust. That's the asset value of a library, which is absolutely, you can't get it anywhere else. An asset value of 150 years of trust. So before we start thinking about what we're going to do with this, let's just hold on to that one. Let's moving forward. I want to talk about libraries and where it's all going in the 21st centuries, but I also want to bring in the kind of what is now known as the Glam sector, which is galleries, libraries, archives and museums. I actually got told off in Adelaide for using that phrase. Apparently, some parts of the kind of heritage, memory and knowledge sector, now that we are talking about this in Australia, the Glam word's not, it's not approved. I should use a collections or something. I don't know. I like Glam. It's fine. The McGovern blog, which has already been mentioned and referred to, is all about contributing to the conversation around what's happening in libraries and critically to this whole notion of Web 2. So what I want to do in the next, and it will be just over an hour actually, and some of it I'll need to rattle through because what I'm doing here is a kind of constellation or a bringing together of two presentations, but I'm still up for it. And some of it I've tweaked because I've realised my audience is slightly different from what it was in Adelaide and what it was in Perth, because I've got a few more government people here, and I've got some stuff to say to you guys. You might like it. You might not, but we'll see. Anyway, contributing to the conversation of Web 2. What I want to do is two things, right? I want to have a quick sort of scurry around this Web 2 stuff. I want to say a few things around that. And then I want to take that thinking, I want to take it into a more formal kind of examination of the policy layer and how we might move this out into the libraries in the 21st century. Okay? So let's see how we go with that. The Web 2 thing, this is Tim Berners-Lee, who's now sort of reinventing history a little bit, right back to those early days, where he's saying that he originally saw the first browsers as not only something that you read, it was also something, where you created. There's some truth in that, but I think actually he's reinventing history a wee bit there. It's entirely true that the idea of the web was that anyone could do it, but it's also entirely true that it was really difficult, and there's quite a few people here who still bear the scars of trying to do a table in HTML, and it's skewing all over the place and going, I don't know, this does not work, and just going, bah humbug, so it wasn't that easy, okay? But stuff happened and we all made stuff and it was all good. And then along comes this Web 2 stuff. What is this Web 2? Well, this is a very unorganized library. This is not a library slide. Now, a librarian didn't make this. There is no taxonomy there, there's no hierarchy, and it's not even A to Z. It's just a mem map. It's got some concepts on it. And some of the concepts we'll come up against as we go through here. One of them, the big one, is blogs. It's about participation. It's not publishing. I like that. I like it for lots of reasons. One of the reasons I like it is because it allows us to see Web 2 as a conversation. It's not audience. I'll come back to that in a minute. It's not driven by the notion of audience. The critical thing we need to get our head round is, way back then, whenever then is, I was part of an audience. And even now, when I switch on the telly, I'm an audience. Somebody gives me something and I consume it. I look at it. Even in the last 10 years, the whole history of the web and building website has been so, and in the company I run, we talk and think and try and play with this with clients all the time, is the idea of the user. that we're not talking about audience, that the best websites are not some kind of flat thing that you come up on and you stick and you take something and you pick up and go, like McDonald's. The best websites are built as a cube. So when you come in, you move, you float, and you've got a user experience, and you can use personas and all sorts of tricks, as some of you will know, to figure out what is a successful visit inside a website, because we're building a space. Now note, again, we're talking about space. Way back in Edinburgh, I'm talking about space. This was my space in Edinburgh. Now we're talking about building websites, which are a space, not some kind of platform where I come and pick something and take it away. This whole idea of blogs is extending that from audience to the user to a new category, which is the co-creator. So we've gone from audience, and now we've got from audience to user, and now we're into co-creator. There's some very powerful kind of ideas, and that's only in one bubble. Now, while I was talking, lots of you have looked around the rest of the bubbles, and you're seeing a few things that probably some of you relate to, and some of you don't know what they're talking about. This one interests me. I always like to torture librarians with this one. Because you guys, some of you guys might be the same, but I know my colleagues, my librarian colleagues, they hate the perpetual beta because they has to be perfect. One of my key messages is it doesn't have to be perfect. Get it out there. It doesn't have to have 73 fields all filled in properly and peer-reviewed by 3 others before it goes out the door. It's not necessary. If you wait that long, when you go out the door, everybody's gone home. And that's a big learning. Moving forward, this is another meme map on Web 2. It brings in this whole notion of a tag cloud and the idea that some words are bigger than others because maybe they're more important than others, or some people think they're more important. One, in terms of libraries, this is actually swearing in church, because this is attached to this concept of folksonomy. And what is a folksonomy? Well, folksonomy is defined by what it isn't, and then what it isn't a taxonomy. It isn't being, a formal set of words or characteristics or classifications in which something has to be pushed into. This is real people coming along and tagging stuff and saying, I think this is X. One of the best examples of that, of a folksonomy within a formal institution, is sitting down at the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney, where ordinary people can come onto the catalogue, search stuff, and then add tags to the real catalogue. Now, for many librarians, that's not just swearing in church. That's just going beyond a joke. As my mum would have said, fun's fun, but to hell with nonsense. Tagging the catalogue, well, come on. But that's what's happening. People are putting their own tags and their own thinking onto these sacred library records. And what is the consequences? Well, one of the unintended consequences of that, they discovered that some of the things, the objects that were being tagged in the collection, this is a museum as opposed to a library. Some of you will know this example, but the rest who don't, it's fascinating. Because the objects that were being tagged were objects that weren't even on display. They were down in the basement. They were locked, these were objects that the museum hadn't actually surfaced for ages. So like the first thing that the curators and the exhibitionists could say, or the exhibitionists could say was, hang on, there's 10 exhibitions in this tag cloud that we know, because people have done this, that they're interested in. So the energy that unleashed was quite fascinating. Moving on. That's 2 sort of mem maps of Web 2. And while I was doing it, you also, what happened there? And all of you looked around a few up. What am I doing? Stop. Don't you love this stuff? Incidentally, I've got a really strong phrase about this. In terms of laptops, you look them straight in the eye and you say, if anyone's going to have a crisis, it's me. Not you. You're a machine. And you move on. McGovern on Web 2, this is my definition. It's a conversation. It's about read, write, collaborate. It's about sources, tools, and people. And it's about the audience, user, and co-creator. Now, I've talked about most of those things apart from sources, tools, and people. Sources, tools, and people is what I get. This is the defining kind of little triangle that defines all my curiosity at the moment. And it's such a huge, complicated model that will take me so long, I couldn't even do it. It's too complicated. Actually, it isn't. It's a triangle, and in the middle of it, there's a question mark. And it simply asks the question. If you put sources at one corner of the triangle, sources means a catalogue, information, whatever it is, it's a knowledge asset. Tools is something you can think. It's an RSS feed, it doesn't matter, it's something. And people. If you talk about, if you give people access to sources, give them the tools, and you let them into a space, what happens? And that's the web for me. That's all that's ever been going on for the last 12 years. Sources, tools, and people. And what happened? So let's move this forward a bit. This framework here, Paul Anderson's, who's over in the UK in JISC, is probably one of the most seminal papers that I've read about Web 2. Now, what I'm going to track you through, there's nothing revolutionary about this, but the framework and the conversation space that I want to get to will help us understand the policy framework. This guy takes all that Web 2 kind of stuff and sticks it into 6 key ideas. And these is just I want to run through very quickly. Or, not very quickly, but, we'll move through briskly. Because for some of you, if some of you think, oh, this isn't, there's nothing particularly novel about what he's going to say here, that's true. But it's a framework for when we do some more thinking. So let's just trawl this through. For some of you, it might be all new. I don't think so, but we'll see. The key ideas. Individual production and user-generated content, harness the power of the crowd, data on an epic scale, architecture of participation, network effects, and openness. 6 things. So let's go over the 6 fences. Individual production and user-generated content. A lot to see there. Some of you are reading, speed reading, a few clicks of the mouse. A user can upload a video, tag it, suitable keywords, make the content available to their friends, in parallel, write blogs, working together to create information through the use of wikis. Just going to run through this blog and wiki thing a wee bit more. And who'd have thought I'm going to use my own blog as the idea here? It's not because I'm a complete ego freak, it's because, for me, back to the wee Scottish boy, stay with that guy because he's still in this room, he's still on this journey with me, and hopefully with you. This blog, if I had that then, this is what I was doing at the time. Way back 13, 14, with a little notebook and all the rest of it, I'm trying to do some thinking. So along comes this blog thing, and you think, okay, I'm going to use this. I'm going to use this Blogger. I'm going to use the Blogger tool because I've got developers in the back room, but I don't want to use them. I just want to use the same tool everybody else does. I started this at the beginning of the year, where I quietly announced I'm now going to start blogging. It's now got some very healthy stats, and I do have a big conversation going with a lot of people in the same world that I'm in. That's not how it started, guys. It started last year, where for at least 4 months, I played with blogs. I abandoned them, did one, blah, and I played. And I knew very much what was happening, because I'm a freelance editor and writer from behold. I know what was going on. I'm playing with voice. As any editor will tell you, get the voice right, you get it. Everything falls into place. Even in non-fiction or fiction, the structure all falls into place. So what I'm looking for is exploring voice. First voice I look at is deeply introspective, stream of consciousness, Jean-Paul Sartre, blah, blah, nausea, and it's crap. It's completely crap. Because for somehow or other, this medium doesn't do introspection, stream of consciousness and all the rest of it. It can on some teen blogs, but not a 57, 58, 57-year-old Dane, a 58-year-old professional. It's not. It doesn't work. Might work for you, didn't work for me. Next one was erudite reviews of books and plays and all the rest of it. And that was cool. Now I thought maybe I'll go with that because I'll get free stuff. And I'll get tickets and things. That was quite nice. But it didn't connect. And what it didn't connect to was my real life, with my professional life. So in the end, you throw it all out and you take a deep breath and you start a new one and you go, I'm talking to my peers. And it starts to work immediately. Because you're trying to unravel and unwrap all this wonderful revolution that you're in. There's other people involved with it, and the conversation starts to happen. And half the conversation is not just in this bit here, it's all happening down here, because you're able to use this tool to put in your own, tag cloud, to put in your own RSS feeds, you can go and find all the people who you're interested in, start looking at their stuff, BT's blog down here, all that good stuff happening here, and blogs I'm reading, and books I'm reading, and all that kind of stuff. And it becomes a really interesting space, at least to yourself. And there seems to be some indication that at least one or two people are actually sharing because you're building up your own network of other blogs, etc. This one is Okeana, and this started off exactly the same. This is Auckland City Libraries, who started off using a blog to buy a young woman from Okeana, is a fairly remote part of the Northland province. She started doing a blog, and she had a great success. And I have to be a bit uncomfortable about this, but I know Auckland City Library guys really well, so it feels okay. And they've acknowledged that what happened then was a mistake, because it started getting a lot of traction. And so marketing grabbed it and started putting all sorts of stuff in it, like you can see, had to have the proper logo and all the rest of it. And it kind of killed the voice. So that was another learning. So moving forward, there's some extra examples I won't go into too much. This Christchurch City Library blog managed to get its voice spectacularly right because it was attached to a whole bunch of projects that were involved in, and that's growing. This is the National Library Tech NZ blog, which has only been going for about 3 months. And it's already, within its own conversational terms, very, very successful. And this is 5 young people inside the National Library of New Zealand who, consequence of a workshop that was run, which, I was involved in, where they were given the space to actually turn around and say, what is it we should be doing around here? And the energy that unleashed, I won't go into that, I don't have time, but the energy that unleashed was absolutely extraordinary, using a little technique called 7x7. Which is you put 7 people in a room, you give them 7 minutes to talk about whatever it is that they are going to contribute to the topic. In this case was if we were using Web 2, what would we use? Moving on. This is another one, I haven't got time for that one. Moving to harnessing the bit of time, sorry about that, but it's a really nice blog, and you can go, sorry, but we don't have time. Harnessing the power of crowd with folksonomies, that's the next slide. And I don't know what that was, it was profound. Whatever it was so profound, it's gone away. It's some kind of haiku. Yeah? Anyway, harnessing the power of crowds, folksonomies, Flickr tagging, social bookmarking, and delicious. I know what's happened. It's the Wikipedia. I'm not going to talk about Wikipedia because we don't have time, other than to say, here's the Queensland way. And for those of you who follow Wikipedia, and I know there's at least a couple of contributors in this room, because there always is, isn't it interesting how people keep talking about Wikipedia as being the madness of crowds, as if it's some kind of thousand monkeys talking nonsense. But more and more, when you actually go to a Wikipedia page, it's absolutely crystal clear that a subject expert has been in there crawling all over it, tidying it up, structuring it and doing it all. And even in lots and lots of places you're starting to see this, and this is a really good example. This is the whole Flickr thing. This was a bunch of, at the last Lianza conference, the National Library, that same young group which emerged out of that thing I was talking about, did this whole exercise where they got people to write down on a card what was their vision for a library. And this was some of the answers, and then they photographed them and put them up on a Flickr badge, and it was a really extraordinary, interesting, and successful campaign. Delicious, we know about Delicious, the whole notion of common bookmarking and all the rest of it. But what it's bringing into play is the whole idea of group cataloguing and group knowledge, and people using groups to begin to systemize and collect their sources. So this wee guy who was sitting in Edinburgh in 1963 at his little desk suddenly has a gang. My space is still inviolate. My space is my blog or my whatever I was, but my space is now being joined by all these other people who are now, and we are now a gang. There are voices, and these voices are in conversation. Voices in conversation is the keynote of this whole presentation. And every one of you, whatever your professional life is about, I believe, and the challenge is, how do we harness these voices in conversation around the issues and the ideas that we have? Because this is not a fad. This is, if you will, the futurist trend. Voices in conversation. And these conversations are happening in digital spaces using tools that have just emerged out of the digital soup. Moving forward. One of the key parts of Anderson's framework is this data on an epic scale. In terms of this particular group, for this particular presentation here in Queensland. And when I'm really enjoying the opportunity to be talking to a bigger audience than just the library world, especially as I understand it, I've got some government people here, and I've got people from universities and people who are involved in some fairly significant projects within digital, imagining the new digital space. This slide here is again another key part of my presentation. This idea of data on an epic scale. This refers back to one of the tag clouds, those two slides, and one of the slides, if you recall, I don't know if you saw it, one of them said, data, the new intel inside. In other words, for Web 2, it's not about the application, it's not about the hardware, or indeed much about the software. It's the fact that the data itself becomes the asset. And I love this phrase, the invisible rain is captured by Web 2 companies and turned into mighty rivers of information. This metaphor can fall over, I know, especially in places which experience drought, but nevertheless, it helps us. Because it gives us this idea that rain, the data raining down, can be collected into rivers, and it makes us the rivers that can be fished. And it introduces the whole idea of the mashup and the programmable web. Again, nothing revolutionary in what I'm saying here, other than the revolution is in the actual doing. The mashup, the idea where you can take one data source and another data source and another data source over there, you can bring it into a space and mash it up and make it into something else, is extraordinarily fruitful for all of us in this room. It is, if you will, not so much our future, but it is a key it's a key road out into the future for the knowledge and the information knowledge, heritage knowledge frameworks or institutional world. And it's also, I believe, and I contend, a key roadway out for government as they try and grapple with the whole notion of e-government and e-services, etc. That's not just state government or federal government, but that's also at local government level. So what do we mean are mashups? Well, I'm sure most of you know about a mashup, but here's a wonderful site that I quite like following. It's very American-centric, programmableweb.com. It posts new mashups all the time. A lot of it's around mapping, a lot of it's around Flash, a lot of it's very geeky and technocentric. Nevertheless, it's interesting. One of the things here in the mapping one is a whole bunch of stuff here. 100 most powerful celebrities mapped onto a Google map. I mean, American, it's rubbish. Did you watch breakfast television this morning? I mean, we're talking about the Californian, drought, and suddenly they do this item about the stars that have had to flee. I thought, this world's gone mad. I don't care if a star had to get in his car and drive away. What about the poor punter living? I mean, whatever. Anyway, 100 most powerful personalities, 1,001 secret fishing holes. I mean, it sounds trivial, but it ain't. Because you're using a common tool, Google Maps, and you're taking some information and you're mapping stuff on it. Now, at some point I get a bit overexcited, and then I have to calm myself down when I get into mapping. And at some point in this presentation, I want to talk to you about an idea, so I might as well do it now. Because I know that some of you guys here, there have to be, it's impossible for it not to be, have got some real interesting ideas in the back of your head around mapping. My notion around mapping is dead easy. Its ambition is overwhelming, and I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, and I certainly need a gang to do it, but I'm going to get a gang, and I'm going to make sure that I'm part of I contribute to this. And what I envisage, because I'm from New Zealand these days, is New Zealand, a New Zealand map, and I call it the Bend in the River project. What I mean is, I can go onto the North Island, I can take my mouse, and I can zoom down, and I can zoom onto the North Island, I can zoom down to the Wanganui River, I can find a bend on the Wanganui River, and I can make it stop. Because then what happens is I start to see this thing on the bend in the river, there's all these knowledge assets just floating up to me. In other words, it's telling the story of the bend in the river. and the pieces of the story are coming from Te Ara, the Encyclopedia of New Zealand. It's coming from every formal authoritative place, but it's also coming from lots and lots of tagged, informal, non-authoritative place. It's also coming from the universities because it's one little button, one tiny little speck on the edge of the paddock. If I click that, it will tell me what the soil ratio is because it's bringing all that data. So it's not just pictures out of a digital collection. It's actually digging right down deeper into the data level. An example of that is Christchurch. Christchurch has now commissioned, I think, about its fifth rather expensive analysis of the water table from, water engineers and scientists, etc. That data will then be, will be examined and it will also be written up in a report. That report will end up on the website, and within about 3 months, some careless web editor will delete it. That's what will happen. It's what always happens. Yeah? But forgetting all the careless web editor, the data will be sitting somewhere, and it will never be used again. The whole point of this model is saying, actually, that data needs to be made available to the community, to the protest group saying we shouldn't do it this way, we should do it another way, so that they can use it for their own mashup. This is a really good example of it. This is theyworkforyou.co.nz, which is a voluntary group which takes New Zealand parliamentarians, the MPs, etc., takes data from different places, including the Parliamentary Library, including House of Representatives, so different data sources, mashes it all together so that I can track and see what my local MP has voted on and done a whole bunch of stuff. It's using public data, about 6 different sources of public data. The interesting thing about it is that the parliamentary librarian, Moira Fraser, actually knows these guys really well and helps them to make sure it works okay. So when they had a bit of because the URLs broke and the parser broke, they actually fixed it together. But this is based on a British model from mysociety, which some of you might know about. What I want to just pause on to take advantage of the e-government direction that we may have in the room is that not only does They Work For You come from this British model called mysociety, this British organisation, there was an extraordinary, wonderfully interesting story about a couple of months ago where the UK Cabinet Office, this story will be well known to the e-government guys, but the UK Cabinet Office commissioned a report, commissioned some research from mysociety, the guys who did this, in which how would they use social networking? How they could use some social networking sites, and they produced this report. And the reports, rather crudely summarised, the reports had two. There was 2 parts to this that are worth our attention. The first was the recommendation. The recommendation was, roughly told, was that if there was a social networking site which dealt with an issue and had an audience set. And the example they give was working mothers, young working mothers with children, single mothers who were on their own. There was a site in which was filled with people who were using the site to help each other and get medical advice, blah, 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 employment advice, a whole bunch of stuff. It was a genuine kind of little social networking portal for young working mothers. The example they give was, if there was such a thing, then government agencies, including the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Employment, all these people, then, one, you should stop using all your money on your own websites and you should give it to them. So not only should you put your information on that website, you should actually actively start thinking about not making your own websites, but taking the pieces, all those information pieces, breaking them up into web consumable objects and sending them out so that they could be consumed by social networking spaces. That was the first thing. The second thing was the Cabinet Office went, great idea. They actually agreed with us. Now, how far they're going to take that, I don't know. But for our purposes, in terms of this presentation, what we're talking about is government information, in principle, being architected and stored and digitally manufactured in such a way that by right it can be sent out, what are called sent out through the window. It can be sent out into social networking and Web 2 spaces by right. That has radical impacts for all of us in our professional life as we try and figure this way through. Let's move forward. They Work For You has their own blog, which is well worth having a look at because they're not only are they talking about themselves, but as you can see, this is quite an old reference, but they're talking about e-government elsewhere, etc. The architecture of participation just follows through with what I'm saying. One of the reasons, one of the core kind of reasons for thinking about how can we get formal authoritative knowledge out into these Web 2 spaces is because inside these spaces they are built using this principle, the architecture of participation. At Web 2, most Web 2 concepts and most Web 2 projects are built with an architecture of participation as part of it. In plain English, the success of the object depends on the number of people in there using it. And without people in there using it, it doesn't work. I don't mean technically, but the business case for it just falls over. Perfect example here is New Zealand's version of eBay, which is TradeMe. I put this up here because it's quite interesting. Hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of people are running small businesses on here. This is the architecture of participation. This is not a trivial site in New Zealand. It was, apart from anything else, Fairfax had just bought it a wee while ago for $850 New Zealand dollars. That was the big Web 2 story. This was built by a guy in his back room with help with a few friends. He's now, Sam Morgan, he's now the poster child for the internet entrepreneur. That's a lot of dosh. Secondly, the dosh, he openly acknowledges that the reason why he's got all that dosh and he's putting it back into new businesses, etc., is because the community of participation that brought it up. The other part of it is half of, in the evening, on any given evening, half of New Zealand's local internet traffic is going there and out of there. That's how popular this guy is. We have Facebook, which is the architecture of participation. Incidentally, these next 3 slides are the only times you will see any slides on Facebook, and I've even binned the MySpace ones. I'm slightly controversial about that. I don't loathe these places, but I just die of boredom as soon as I approach them. As soon as my mouse goes to click, I feel this huge boredom coming on, because this is chewing gum. You may have different views, and that's fine. We can talk about that. But I'm being quite, provokingly controversial. I don't know, or deeply boring about it. But I find this stuff boring. There's some energy. I'm not doubting that. And we can look at the energy. Here's the energy around libraries. You put keyword libraries inside Facebook, and you get 71 profiles, 500 groups, 37 events, and 10 applications. I find the 500 groups interesting. 37 events, I find that's it. There's 370 events happening in this building. There's only 37 on Facebook. I thought, oh, darn, what's going on here? But, whatever. 500 groups is interesting. What's also interesting is the 10 applications, because Facebook allows you to build, or not allows, but deeply encourages the idea of somebody else building a little mini application and embedding it into Facebook. And you'll see that one of the libraries has started to do that, and there's some energy around this, as you can see. I also quite like this, which is a mini library. This is the European Libraries page on Facebook. It's quite interesting. But I also like this. The 37 events I'm bored by. This guy here, libraries and librarians, there are quite a few thousand people on this group. And this has some energy in it, and I think it's quite interesting. But that's all. For me, this is not the future. This is an interesting sideshow in which I think, and again, if this was a lot more librarians here, I'd be making this point a lot stronger, but I'm still going to make it. I think this is a complete distraction. I don't know how many of you guys play squash, and I used to a long time ago. As you can see, it was a while ago. But I do know enough, and I remember enough. If you're sweating, you're losing. If the guy's running up, if you're the one that's running up and down the court while the other guy's standing in the middle, you're losing. You need to be the guy that's standing in the middle. If we want to get a bit zen about this, we also know that what you need to do is stand still, be yourself, and know what it is you want to do. Center. Don't go running up and down looking after a fad here. Oh, that's where our customer is. Oh, we better go and hang out there. Hello? For me, it's just not it. It's not thought through properly. Moving on. Libraries and librarians discussions. I make my point because here we go. In libraries and librarian discussions, you can see that in library innovation, you have 8 posts by 7 people. This is not a conversation. It's an echo from 5,000 years ago. That's all that is. Openness. This is the core. Openness, in terms of Anderson's 6 key ideas, is it. Once we've got, in actual fact, we're going to do a bit more on policy and all the rest of it, but this is it. If you wanted to, after this slide, if you wanted to leave, it's cool. It's fine. I've made my message, which is APIs, application programmable interfaces, or, in plain English, little pieces of software, or a piece of software, or a set of rules written into a piece of software, in which a bigger data set can be accessed, discovered, and pulled and brought into a civic space or brought into another place. An application programmable interface is a way of getting data from there and pulling it into a space and started to use it. I've already made the point. I'm just making it one more time. We have the technology to be able to pull data into these new kind of civic spaces. It's my central contention that way back then, 10 years ago, 9 years ago, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, and it stopped about then, maybe 6 years ago, our ideas were in front of the technology. The guys I was playing with, and we were going, what if we did this? We had ideas way in front of the technology. These days, ladies and gentlemen, I believe it's entirely the other way about. The technology, our ideas are behind the technology. We have got, as professionals, to speed up in our imagineering, in our figuring out how we can use this. And I hope I'm sure some of you have realized, I don't buy this. It's technology, it's geeks, we don't understand it. It is our job to understand it. And this is one of the other things I'm fond of saying. Well, I'm not actually fond of saying, you're getting a wee bit of grumpy Paul here. I'm 58 years old. I'm one of those generations from the 60s, as I said. I got free education, I got all this, I was, part of that whole golden group. And now, we've kind of got the levers of power now. So we are kind of in charge, this generation. So I'm asking the question, this generation has now got the levers of power and is now in charge. When was it okay? When did we decide that our kids would invent our digital future? When did that happen? What email did I miss? Which said, no, our kids will do it. Oh, they know what's going on. We don't need to know what's going on. Oh, we'll just ask our kids. They'll figure it out. Oh, you don't know how to do it? Oh, go and ask that wee boy down there. He'll show you. I get really grumpy about that, guys. It's our job to invent our children's future. And we need to take that responsibility. And the idea that we don't do digital, it'll all figure itself out and it'll be somebody else's job. No. Not on. Think harder. Be braver. Ask more questions. Figure it out. That's my little lecture. Sorry. APIs. We're starting to see in New Zealand, and I'm going to move into the next part, which is the policy layer, blah, 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 and how are we doing for time? Can I just offer some feedback in this wonderful building that you have here, this great auditorium? It needs a clock. Speakers need a clock, to get a reality check. Oh, right, okay, yeah. There's no point asking me to look down on a little clock on the computer because it's gone. I can't see it, all right? And I need to interrupt and I go, excuse me, folks, while I look at my phone. Thank you. Moving on, right? It's 11:26. You've done very well. Yeah. Caring, sharing, a little bit of feedback there. Yeah. APIs. Well, so how far have we got? Well, the answer is, and you guys might be able to, and I would love it if you all came storming up to me at the end and said, Paul, New Zealand might be this, they might be that, but we've cracked this, and here they are. If you can do that, I'd be absolutely over the moon. But where are the public APIs? Where is the data sets from key memory, knowledge institutions, government institutions or whatever that can go flooding out to the space? This is Tiara, the Encyclopedia of New Zealand. Wonderful kind of little thing on my blog there where the editor of this, Jock Phillips, you can read the blog post, but in the end, what we have is a slam dunk acknowledgement from our Jock that every piece of Tiara should be available out on the Web 2 space. I thought that was an extraordinary admission from that guy, and that's a complete key change, and we're going forward on that. Here's New Zealand History Online, where they're at least starting to use, and I put this in because I thought it was, it's a shared cultural experience for all of us here. This is the Anzac Cove. And so you've got New Zealand History Online where they're starting to map some of the key pieces of the history there. Sure, it's New Zealand focused, but that can change. So again, we're back to our map and the idea of knowledge maps. I am fascinated by knowledge maps. I think it's one of the big drivers of how we'll actually achieve this. How will we get our politicians to actually understand they've got to start resourcing this because they can see how the knowledge maps onto the world. You don't have to, don't go to a politician and say, Minister, metadata, it's important. They run away. And they should. They haven't got time to be given a lecture on the 16 elements of Dublin Core. This is nonsense. We've got to lift it up a wee bit and tell them compelling stories, as Penny Carnaby from the National Library would say. And she's quite good at it, because her compelling stories to ministers managed to unlock quite a lot of money. Moving on. Here's an example which doesn't use APIs. This is Matapihi, and it's absolutely acknowledged. It's based on Picture Australia. It uses a whole bunch of memory institutions right across the whole of New Zealand, libraries, archives and galleries, mostly museums, digitised photographs, more audio, now video, put together, and you can search across it, federated search across it, and it uses Dublin Core, at the back end and all that good stuff. It's great, with one problem. There's no rules in it to use it. You can discover, it's an access and discovery tool, but it isn't a create and share tool. I can't use this. I've got no rights to use this. There's nothing that says that you can take all these pictures and you can mash them up and you can use them and do all that kind of stuff. There's no RSS in there. I can't pull stuff out. I can't move it. I can't put it on my blog. It just sits there. It's fabulous. And it's the memory tech sector talking to the memory sector. That's what it is. It's not a conversation. Back to what my keynote is. Which brings me to this whole Glam, galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, the Data River scorecard. It's not very good. And I would actually join government in that as well. Government isn't to go scorecard on getting their data out isn't very good either. So, okay. And if the idea is to build public and civic space in the fifth estate, which is a new phrase I've come across from the Oxford Internet Institute, then it's about don't tell me why, tell me how. Okay. There's a whole bunch of slides here on library frameworks, but because there's not that many librarians, I'm just going to get a rapid rattle through these, okay? But they don't tell me why, is tell me how, is because in the last 4 years, as I've got more and more involved in kind of well-entering government and all the rest of it, and got onto advisory boards, I've realised, to my gobsmacking astonishment, that not only do I acknowledge the need for strategy documents, that some of them can be quite interesting. Now I'm starting to get very scared that my whole sort of inner DNA is changing, but never mind. I know that strategy documents have to happen to make stuff happen at a policy level. So where are we? Well, there's a couple, 2 or 3 strategy documents which you're not going to get talking to, which is the NZ Library Strategic Framework. You might get a bit on the Big Bang, though. The Big Bang is the Australian library guys, state and national and state libraries of Australia. This is a piece of work that they've been doing. I actually think that this is actually all of you should be looking at this. There's some learnings for everyone here in this room, which is around reshaping their collections, finding their collections, dribbling their collections, and expanding the user expectations. If you unpack at number 5, you'll find that they're talking about content strategies and also bringing the user or contributing into user spaces. But if we talk about some common ground here, the common ground, if you will, in the Glam sector and possibly out into government and academia, etc., is this idea that certainly libraries And bear in mind, I'm not abandoning the whole concept of the focus here on this presentation completely about public libraries. I absolutely believe that public libraries are a key institution of civil society. I totally believe that they have a vibrant future in the 21st century if they start seeing their new life as a way of building digital civic space. And I believe that everybody who's sitting here needs to acknowledge that libraries are a key part of a community infrastructure, and they can be a vibrant tool to get your agenda in and out and have a conversation. If we're talking in those terms, then these are the 4 key areas: lifelong learning, recreation, heritage, and community. All public libraries, this is the core to their internal DNA. This is what they do. The Reynolds framework, though, in terms of making change, is around just 3 things: cultural, political, and professional. And in the last 10 minutes, this is what I want to explore. Note the key. You're still going to get 10 minutes. Cultural, political, and professional. What I mean by that is that if libraries are actually going to grab everybody's attention, especially politically, and if we're going to look at these knowledge frameworks in terms of a 21st century, then we've got to have this different framework. The cultural frame is to reaffirm the idea that Web 1, Web 2, Library 2.0, Facebook and MySpace in these places is chewing gum. It's not it. What we need to be building are library spaces and digital spaces which are part of a creative community. Now, keynote here, or another note here. I don't mind the whole idea of a creative economy. I'm part of it. I actually earn money in this area. My company does rather well in this area. I've starved and I'm okay, and I know which one I prefer. So I understand the notion of a creative economy. I understand the idea that the creative sector is a key part of the new economic transformation that we're all trying to achieve. What I don't understand, and I get grumpy around, is this focus on the creative sector as the only ones who will take us forward. Because what that undermines and crucially ignores is the concept of a creative community. Creative community has to be creativity has to be part of the whole community, not some kind of elite. I'm a wee Scottish boy who was brought up in that whole tradition. I deeply believe that. That if we start talking about creative elites, we have lost. We start talking about creative communities, we start having a conversation that I can join in. And I believe that public libraries are a core part of that creative community space, because it's where we all went to be creative in the first place, to get the tools, to get the sources, to actually start doing some thinking. There is not a creative in the world of the Western society who will not acknowledge that the local library was one of the places where they started doing their thinking. I think literacy programs for children, for babies, for young people are absolutely crucial. I think grasping the opportunity to engage with teenagers, the libraries in their own spaces is absolutely crucial. This is core work. Moving forward, though, the whole point about the cultural bit is that the whole library world has to re-engage and actually can reconvince everyone, including everyone in this room who's on the political spectrum and in the public service spectrum and that whole thing. We've got to reconvince that libraries are a key part of the equation here. Politically, though, there's a whole lot of more work to be done. The politicians need to be convinced that the whole library Glam sector is not just some kind of cultural add-on, which is great to get the invite to on Thursday evening, that it's actually a core part of the DNA of creating creative communities. To get at that, we need to start talking about some strategy work. And one of them is this New Zealand National Digital Strategy and the New Zealand Content Strategy. The digital strategy, of which I've been, so I had some dealings, so I had some input into. I think there's some really interesting work in here. Digital strategy is based on 3 C's: connection, confidence, and content. Connection's dead easy. It means broadband, it means pipes, it means fat pipes. And by the way, I'm still convinced that the best way in which we can get over or demonstrate what real broadband looks like, none of this sort of play stuff, when people start talking about, it's not real broadband, one of the problems with that is that we don't know what real broadband is. Well, maybe real broadband is something like what they have in Korea, which is 100 gigs, 100 meg a second inside an apartment block. 100, 1 gig connection, standard offer. Some people have got a 2 gig connection. So we're sitting around about 500k, 1 gig, 1 meg, 2 meg connection. We think that's broadband. Maybe we'll go up to 5, maybe we'll go up to 10 megabytes per second. We talk about that as being broadband. It's not. Real broadband takes us up a measure of 10, 20. So you go up to 100 megabytes per second, which is 1 gig. And you've got to start talking about 2 gigabytes. That's what broadband is. But all that means nothing, gigabytes. Even I, who understand this stuff, stumble on these words. It's dead easy. We want to demonstrate what real broadband looks like. We go to your public library. That's where it lives. You want to see it? You want to feel it? You want to touch it? Go down there. It's a public space. You own it. You belong in there. That's my point. The connection part of it is really interesting. We don't have time to go into it too much. One of you can see content, confidence, and connection inside communities, business, and government. These are the 3 enablers. Right now, this whole strategy has been thought about because I'm having a digital refresh conference in November in which we're looking to see how this, maps out. One of the problems with this whole strategy is it is, quote, an all-of-government strategy. It needs to be more than that. It needs to be an all-of-country strategy. And one of the problems is that most of the energy has been around government at the moment in some communities. What hasn't happened is engaging business. So the new strategy is very much about economic transformation and sustainability and all those kind of things. That kind of thinking is going on. Inside the current digital strategy, the other strand was, in the confidence strand, was around the Community Partnership Fund. Community Partnership Fund wasn't a lot of money. It was $20 million. But the key point was it used, to get community partnership funding, you had to have a community project. And this community project, thank you for your attention, sir. Have I still got 10 minutes? Are you okay? Or does people need to leave? Do I need to speed up? People who need to think I need to speed up, put your hand up. Okay, all right, that's good. It's an important point to leave there, is that the Community Partnership Fund had at its core that you can get some funding, not a lot, you go from the 20 million. You had 64 innovative information and communication technology, ICT, community projects. You had to, there's some example there, the Royal New Zealand Foundation for the Blind pilot study to convert school curriculum text, Gisborne District Council's New Computers and Homes project. There was a whole bunch of projects in there which actually had some key learning in there, which I won't go into too much, although I will be mentioning one further down the track. It's called the People's Network. The Broadband Challenge was another fund, and that was really interesting because that put some MUSH, which is municipals, universities, schools, and hospitals, public fibre network into some cities, and started to think about using these public, the public institutions as foundation anchor tenants in which then everyone else could pile in. We've had some success on that, but there's an interesting part of it. One of the success points is North Shore City, which is in one of the authorities in Auckland. The libraries is part of that, curiously enough. They've now got a very substantial broadband pipe coming into their library. But famously, in a presentation, one of the librarians, the library manager, turned when asked what were they going to do with it, rather blushingly said, and this is, he didn't quite mean it as like this, rather blushingly said, we're not sure. Now he did, he had a whole bunch of ideas that he was sure about, but what he meant was they hadn't done the policy work around it. They hadn't actually thought through what it was they would do if Nirvana arrived. And Nirvana, in terms of broadband, did arrive for them, and they weren't ready. So we have all this, and everybody, and I know you guys are having it as part of the federal election, so I won't comment on any of that, but you're having this whole conversation about broadband. It seems to me that libraries, the Glam sector, and the wider government kind of service, we've got to start thinking, and certainly academia, is that what is the impact of really, really proper broadband in people's homes, like Korea, etc.? We've got to start doing that thinking and that modelling now, because it will happen. Moving on. before I'll move off, the Broadband Challenge also had this other strand, which was the remote and underserved communities, which is for some of the, out and I really was keen on mentioning that in this context because you guys do remote far better than New Zealand. You guys invented remote in some underserved communities, certainly, but, the distances are so vast. One of the projects in there that I'm involved in is with Tūhoe, which is an iwi up in New Zealand, Maori iwi called Tūhoe. They've been in the news because they have their tribal area is the Urawera Mountains. And according to, I don't know if you've been watching that, but apparently there's 17 people who were arrested because they were supposed to be doing terrorist camps in the middle of the Urawera Mountains. I don't know if that story came over the ditch to you guys, but it's been in the press for the last couple of years, a couple of days, or a couple of weeks. It's actually complete twaddle. Although it might not be, it's sub judice, there might be something in it. The punchline is there are camps, there are dozens upon dozens upon dozens of little camps in the Urawera Mountains because the Tūhoe people who live in Auckland and Wellington and all the rest of it regularly go back to the rural bush, back into, and that's what they do. 30,000 people identify as Tūhoe and 25,000 of them live outside the Rohe. This project that they're doing here is all about, wait for it, and that's why I'm bringing it in, putting broadband wireless access throughout the Uraweras. Now, these are proper mountains. This isn't one sort of little, and this is proper bush. They are wiring the mountains, and they are doing it. And the reason they're doing it is because they're going to build Tūhoe online. You think I've got something nasty, I'm not very impressed by MySpace, I'm not very impressed by Facebook. You should hear these guys. This will be written and delivered in Te Reo Tūhoe, which is Māori, and they will be doing. And the whole point of wiring the Uraweras is to reconnect their people in the digital world. So forget Second Life, as far as they're concerned. There's going to be Tūhoe world, and these guys are going to do this. Make no mistake about it. And they're a complete inspiration to me as I move forward. The content strategy. The point about the content strategy for the national digital strategy is the acknowledgement that if you get the broadband right, if you get the confidence and the capability right, then what's the content layer? Is it enough just to let people go off and, the content will arrive and everybody will sort it out and Google will sort it out? Is that okay? Or do we actually have to start thinking about this as a policy layer? The answer was yes, it had to be thought about on a policy level. So because this is Wellington, because this is government, it's okay, it's not the phone. It's me saying you've been talking long enough. But I haven't. It's all right saying, it's saying that if you've got the content, if you've got the capability right, if you've got the confidence right, then what does the content layer look like, or do you just leave it to Google? The problem, of course, with leaving it Google is that Google doesn't even remotely touch it. The first thing you learn about Google is that he's only 8. So Google is an 8-year-old blind American kid. That's what Google is. An 8-year-old blind American kid who has discovered 20% of the known web and managed to map a lot of it and make a really, really, really brilliant little bit of searching technology which works. And he made a huge business around contextual searching and paid advertising, and they are going to eat everybody's lunch commercially, especially the big media players. You can guarantee that. But they've done it by indexing 20% of the known web. And they've done it also by manifestly, by most people not realizing that more and more of the good stuff is going behind password-protected walls of paid or whatever content. That more and more of academic research and all the rest of it is disappearing more and more into deep webs. That's what's happening. So when you start thinking about that, you think, okay, so how does New Zealand start thinking about content? Well, because this is a government or a policy layer, each part of the content capability and connection part of the strategy was allocated to a government agency. In New Zealand, for some reason, nobody knows what they were smoking that day, but they gave it to the National Library. The content strategy was given to the little old National Library, not the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, who deeply wanted it, not, various other places, gave it to the National Library. Now, I have to tell you, and this is slightly speaking out of lunch, and I know this has been recorded and all the rest of it, but I have to say that the consequences of that were really quite interesting. One of which was that for 3 years, because that's how long, 2 years, the content strategy work's been going on, every time the National Library walked down Mulver Street down into the Wellington, the middle of Wellington, their peers started beating them up and nicking their homework, nicking the lunch money. This was a really controversial decision to give it to the National Library to start thinking about the content layer. And, I'm being appointed this wonderful adjunct director to the National Digital Library, which is 50 days' work, by the way, so let's get this, just into proportion. Adjunct means just little. The point of the tale is I am deeply impressed with these guys. These are librarians. When they first started off to map the knowledge landscape, they got a piece of paper out and said, well, we'll make a list. That's what librarians do. What's in the knowledge landscape? It can't be that difficult. We've been doing this forever. It's easy. There's this collection, there's that collection. We'll just make a list. We'll sort it. It'll be all over in 10 minutes. 2.5 years later, they finally sussed it. Well, actually, they sussed it pretty quickly. Was that if they were going to do this in the digital world, then they had to start thinking about this stuff. That there was 3 kinds of content. There was formal content, which was the formal, authoritative, taxonic content that was in institutions and was in academia, was in research, was all over the place, was in galleries, archives, and museums. But also, there was this informal, anarchic content of blogs and community organizations and Web 2. All that stuff was there. They hadn't even thought about how to think about that stuff. They were introduced, this is, 2.5, 3 years ago, to the whole concept of delicious, to blogs and all the rest of it. And don't get too superior here. Most of you guys hadn't been playing with that stuff either then. And they were going, oh, but that's not part of it. And then they got this group of, unfortunately titled the Imagineers, which was people in the web industry. They invited them in this group who were all invited in, and to heckle them, to badger them, to say, look, you're getting it wrong. If you think mapping authoritative, just going into your collections, that this institution has this collection of photographs and we've got to digitize this lot and this lot, if you think that's a content strategy for the 21st century, you are deluded. And they accepted it. They listened to that and said, okay. And they started, this is the first model, the 3 circles, formal content, informal content, and commercial content. And it was understanding, and this diagram, these 3 circles, actually should have another circle in the middle, because you're back to my triangle, which is when I first introduced that triangle. I can remember leaping up and drawing it on a whiteboard. The bit we need in the middle is the question. A space in the middle, question mark. If we pull all this stuff, if we make compelling digital spaces, or if these compelling digital spaces appear, this is before APIs are starting mainstream. Then the bit in the middle, the real activity is how does the person in the middle, the citizen, get access to the stuff so that they can use it. And I'm nearly done, guys. Because what I've done is brought you to the door that I want you to walk through, the pillar into the valley below, call it what you will. It's the use it. It's not about discovery. Librarians love to search. People like to find. It's about when you find it, what can you do with it? And more importantly, it's not having to go knocking on a million doors. It's about thinking about how can the knowledge assets of a nation, whether it's the core part of our own stuff or what we've bought on behalf of the citizens. Because bear in mind, if 20% of the web is free, 80% of it isn't. So who's going to buy that on your behalf? Who's going to buy the other 80%? Who's going to make sure that the other 80%, the hidden deep web, the real stuff, who's going to make sure that that's available to the 14-year-old who's walking into the equivalent of the Edinburgh Reference Library? Well, it's going to be the libraries. They're already doing that. But that's great. That's a great start. buying consortiums and buying access to. But I know what the New Zealand one looks like. The consortium project's called EPIC, and I believe you've got one of your own. There's some great resources in there. But as I like to tell my library colleagues back in New Zealand, don't think you've cracked it. EPIC's horrible. People are dying inside EPIC, trying to find the door out again. They're forever being asked to search and re-authenticate and find something else. It's a nightmare inside NetEnt. This is not a compelling user experience. You think because you've bought you've bought access that's it. It's not. Libraries are about building compelling spaces. And that's a personalized space. And I'm nearly done, guys. But if you are building this, if you're starting to build not just a library compelling spaces, then basically on a society, on a countrywide bit, what you're starting to talk about is using digital content. By having high-speed broadband, by talking about digital convergence, and in convergence we're talking about something just as easy, that it has to be on this mobile phone just as easily as anywhere else. And content on demand, that people want it all the time. But this content on demand is a really, really interesting point that I want to make in my closing remarks. We're not talking about libraries or public institutions, the knowledge institutions, whatever, becoming McDonald's. I was at a presentation at a library conference in which one of the big vendors stood up and he says, our customers, they want it fast and they want it quick and they want to leave. And I nearly stood up and said, twaddle. This is nonsense on stilts. If libraries start to want to be fast and they want to leave, if they want to compete on that level, they're dead, they're gone. Because they've given up their DNA. And their DNA is to create a space. I don't want to be McDonald's. We want to create the French Cafe, which is a restaurant in Auckland, which you'll save 6 months to go and have a meal in, and you'll spend five hours there. And the first thing they do is hand you this tiny little consomme little cup thing, which you went, oh, that's not much. And then you take one sip, and your whole mouth explodes because they know what they're doing with food. That's what we need to be talking about, is that kind of ambition. Building digital public space in which people have rights in which they can come and occupy and begin to create. And this is my last kind of big slide. The slide for the tape is trying to show that the New Zealand digital content has got 5 bits to it. 5 elements. I don't know if any of you realize this, but there's there's a school of acupuncture called it's 5 Elements School. I quite like that. Because it brings in this whole idea of yin yang and the balance stuff, and standing still and being centered and being really clear. Because what this is saying is that there are 5 elements. The first one is creating and protecting content. What's the policy framework around helping people create and protect content? What kind of tools do we need to offer people to give the creating and the protecting? The protecting bit is basically when you create something, what rules do you want to put around it? And one of the best rules framework is the Creative Commons. And you guys need to take a round of applause. The Australian Creative Commons framework is really first class. New Zealand's just got ourselves sorted out, and we now have a Creative Commons license which launches this coming Saturday. And most of that work has been based on what you guys have already done. I don't know how many of you know this, but the Creative Commons Australian framework is a benchmark for the Creative Commons framework worldwide. You guys have sorted that stuff out. What hasn't happened is that the Glam sector, the knowledge and the memory and the big institutional stuff haven't actually looked at the Creative Commons saying, this works for us. I mean, I'd quite like to ask the question, how many pieces of the State Library of Queensland are available within the Creative Commons framework? I suspect, and I am being facetious, I'm being grotesquely facetious, it's possibly 2. There are 2 images. And funnily enough, this is the home of the Creative Commons in Australia. The most public, I'm not privileged, Most public institutions, museums, galleries, archives and libraries have yet to get their head around the Creative Commons. I'm turning to the next one, the accessing and discovering content. See, the problem with my library colleagues, this is what obsesses them. Accessing and discovering content. And it's because they need to get it right. I absolutely agree with that. Completely agree with it. Discovery tools, accessing tools, digitization, we've got to get the metadata right, we've got to get all that right. Totally understand that. But if that's all we do, we're going to fail. Because the other 4 elements, we've talked about the creating and protecting and accessing, but it's this third one, sharing and using content. What are the frameworks to share and use? Is it just Facebook? Is it just Blogger? Or are we going to start thinking about how to build compelling spaces, which, just like that kid when he was 14-year-old at Edinburgh Reference Library, can come in, make themselves their own little studio space, etc. And if you have done that, what are the rules about managing and preserving? In other words, in 50 years' time, some of that stuff that's been created will be gone. It will be disappeared because it was born digital. And in 50 years' time, the machines it was made on, the software it was developed on, all that stuff will have been gone. So what's the rules around that? Now, there's lots of library frameworks, including the National Library and the National Heritage, the NDHA, the National Digital Heritage Archive. They're spending a lot of time and a lot of thinking getting that right, and good on them. And by the way, what they're doing is preserving that stuff at the bitstream level. That's the little kind of preservation, that's the preservation engine that they are building. And it's a world-class piece of work. That they're going to preserve digital assets at the bitstream level. So in 50 years' time, there's a metadata record which says, what was this made with? And it recreates, it emulates, and recreates the object as it was at that time. It's a really interesting piece of work, and I commend it to you. The third element is understanding and awareness of content. Now, that's just basic research. That's just trying to figure it out. But the real energy is around sharing and using content. And it's asking the question, where can we start doing that thinking? Where can we start thinking about not only creating and protecting content and discovering content, but also the sharing and managing and all that stuff? Where are it? Now, I just want to quickly touch on three projects, and I really am nearly there. The big one is the People's Network. The People's Network project, and I don't have any slides to show you what it is because it doesn't exist yet, is this idea. The People's Network project came out of the UK, in which it was fundamentally about putting broadband into the public library network and giving people access to free internet. It was an extraordinarily big success. They also did this huge training layer, in which they trained librarians, and then they gave a lot of training to the community groups and also to individuals on how to use this stuff. And they did a bit of content. The New Zealand version of the People's Network layer is much, much bigger than that. It has at its heart this content layer. Now, although it's a small project to start with, in which it's only rolling out to a few libraries, the ambition is to roll it out to every public library. But it's the content layer that I would ask you to just hold on to, and maybe when it starts to emerge, collaborate and think about joining in, and maybe have some common thinking around. Because what it's saying, and I need to shoot through about 100 million slides here, what it's saying is, how can we build an online space called the People's Network so that when you go up to it, you can, it can be based in a public library, it could be based in a community centre, it could be based in anywhere, it could be based in a very rural area of Australia. It's a model that might really be interesting here. That when I go there, I get access to a whole bunch of the formal stuff, which is coming out of libraries or coming out of government or coming out of work. But at its core is an ability to build and manage my own digital life. Now, that might be about writing my own digital story. It might be looking at e-government kind of sources, but it's my little space. So at the core of the People's Network is to give everyone in New Zealand, that's the ambition, this ability to manage and build their own digital life inside there. It's a read-write opportunity. I need to move forward because some tools to start with thinking. We don't have time to go through Fitch or MyStudio or North Shore or Tuhoe. All of these were different variations on how to build these different spaces. The Fitch is one of them, which is a library tool, and it's absolutely not of interest to most of you. So I'm going to switch through it, and I'm going to go quickly to Tuhoe. Back to our friends at Tuhoe. The friends at Tuhoe was at iwi, who I said 30,000 of them live, there are 25,000 outside the Rohe. The digital space they're building is all about giving their people their own digital life. It's modelled on the People's Network. What I'm saying here, if we build those rich digital spaces and we give people access to these tools where they can build and enrich their own digital life, what we're talking about is something that this guy Jason Calacanis calls Web3. It's the creation of high-quality content and services produced by individuals using Web 2 technology as an enabling platform. This guy's English, you can tell. But you can hear what he's saying. It's using Web 2. Okay, there's Web 2. People are starting to do stuff inside. These are tools for people to create. But Web 3 throttles back this idea of the wisdom of the crowds and turning into the madness of the mobs by bringing into that space the authoritative stuff. So what's happened here, and I need to make sure I've brought you with me as I close, instead of, although this is important, that government sources, the APIs from state libraries, national libraries, museums, all our memory, knowledge frameworks, knowledge institutions, instead of all that side stuff still having to be pushed out into all these other, if you like, free radical, anarchic web stuff, that goes on, that's a given, that's happening. But what's also saying is we need to start thinking about building our own spaces. Back to the squash model and standing still and building a space in which the middle part, the core of it, is the individual, just like that little guy in 14 years old in Edinburgh, sits and creates his own space. And that's what this is trying to talk about. Because there would be 4 different ways to talk about this. I'll just wrap up with one. Auckland City Libraries and the Chinese community opportunity. What we're building there is, in the Chinese community in Auckland is diverse. There's about 3 or 4 different layers to it. But they do have a common cultural link. Now that means that they can quite often talk in the different groups, which are 4th generation New Zealand Chinese, right up to new immigrants coming in from Beijing right now. There are some cultural touch points which are common. And one of them, as an example, is the Lantern Festival. Lantern Festival is a thing that happens at Chinese New Year, and which also, and the one in Auckland is immense. It's huge. It's just fabulous. It's 3 days in which this public park is covered in lanterns, and at night, and it's food, and there's performance, and all the rest of it. Every Chinese person's got a Lantern Festival story. And this is the last bit, I promise you, we're nearly there. Every one of them has got a Lantern Festival story. So the idea is to build Auckland City Libraries. They got the money from the community partnership, so it links back to the digital strategy stuff. They got the money to do this for the Chinese community, and the Auckland City Libraries got the money to do it from the community partnership fund. It's to build a story box. Now the story box allows people to start telling their stories. And up on the top pane, you'll see other people's, the other people in the Chinese community talking, putting in their own stories. So you can talk and listen and share. You can look at other people's storybooks and share some of its audio and some of its video. Now think of the People's Network. It's the same DNA. It's the same thinking. People sit down and they've got the tools to start telling a story. Now this isn't telling a story so as it ends up in some, this is not a way of sucking heritage and sticking it into the state library. It just does it for itself. So they're telling a story. Now, the software is smart enough because it's using tagging. As I say, the technology is ahead of ourselves here. We can tell what the keywords here. So it's not actually hard to build a little machine which says they're talking about lantern festivals. By definition, this is a Chinese community because this is their thing, so there's some metadata around there, so we know who they are. We know what the topic is. So there's context. We're building a little context story, a story machine with some context recognition stuff. It's not hugely difficult. What the clever trick is that pings out to all the other heritage like the National Library, the Te Papa, which is the big museum, Auckland Museum, archives, Hocken. We've investigated this. We know that all these institutions have really rich collections of Chinese material, both local indigenous stuff here in New Zealand, in the New Zealand stuff, and also through connections with the National Library of China and all that kind of stuff. And it goes, so it's flooding into the space down the left-hand side, the resources that they have on Chinese lantern stuff. So the storytelling becomes a context in which it's pulling in from the formal authoritative world sources that they can then either use for the story or simply there to enrich and enhance the story. Now that's happening on one side. On the other side of the screen, Auckland City Library is committed to building some access, some connectors, the Z35 staff and 39 and all that kind of stuff, which connects into the library catalogue, connects into EPIC, which is these closed databases of paid-for sources, and pulls and says, okay, we've got 10 new books. We know this is the Chinese community talking to itself. Here are 10 new titles. Here is this. So that this whole little space becomes a contextual kind of my group, our space. And it's starting to see how these spaces can really help communities bond build. Now, from a government layer, there's nothing to stop if the local authority, or indeed the state authority, has got programs or has got key messages for these different communities that they want to say. There's nothing to stop that being wrapped around. So there's a win-win here. But the main win, and this is my wrapping point, the main win here is to absolutely understand that in the 21st century, digital is ordinary. It's absolutely fundamental to how we will live our life. And building and managing the tools in which we can access the resources isn't something that's just some extra add-on. The idea that an institution can have a budget, and I have no idea what the budget of this institution is, but I know what some public library budgets are. But just say the number is 100 million, an enormous number, I know. So let's take it down to 10 million. If your current digital, and I know this, is say 10 million, your current digital budget is $700,000, or about 8% of that, then the game's a bogey. No job unchanged. No sacred cows. No thinking it will stay the same. It won't. Digital is ordinary. And we've got to understand and appreciate and think the impact of that. It's up to us to think harder. And my last phrase is not just think harder, but be braver. These are key institutions that you are all involved in, and they have a future, but you need to help build it. You can't leave it for somebody else. That's me done. Thank you. Thank you. Cheers.
I realise we've gone a bit over, so I think we will dispense with the questions, and perhaps if you've got something really burning, you can come up and briefly talk to Paul. But again, from all of us, thank you enormously. I think it's thrown out some pretty major challenges to most of us in this room, so thank you.